Thank you for joining us. I'm Richard Peritz, and we are honored to have with us today a most inspiring leader and best-selling author, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, who is regarded as the GOP's most brilliant thinker and strategist. His profound understanding of the domestic and international challenges facing the United States and the world at this time are actually revitalizing America's political landscape. Speaker Gingrich is also a true friend of Israel, and he'll update us on important issues following these messages. With us now is Speaker Newt Gingrich. Mr. Speaker, it's a great honor and privilege to have you with us today,
Great to be here,
sir.
I'm delighted to be on Shalom TV.
Thank you, sir. We are witnessing a rather dramatic time in history with odd things occurring. How do you see the challenges facing the United States at this time in history?
Well, I think this is one of the great pivot points of history, from economics with our domestic economy to the rise of China to the fact that we have for a decade been unwilling to confront the dangers of radical Islamism, to the fact that our bureaucracies are less and less competent and less effective, that they're gradually growing slower and tireder as the world speeds up and accelerates. I think that we're faced with a decade or more of dramatic and bold changes, and I'm an optimist. I think we'll come out of that stronger, more prosperous, and more successful, but I think it's going to take real hard work to get there.
Mr. Speaker, the political initiative you're most widely identified with was the Contract with America, an economic and social agenda designed to improve the efficiency of government while reducing its burden on the American taxpayer. How the issues changed?
Well, I think my core values go all the way back to my childhood, so I don't think my core values have changed. We have a different set of challenges today, but some of the issues are similar. We had entitlement reform with welfare and Medicare in the 1990s. We had a requirement to get the economy to keep growing with tax cuts, particularly capital gains tax cuts. We had a requirement to get to a balanced budget. Those kind of challenges are universal, and I think we're faced with them all over again today.
What are your thoughts, sir, with regards to health care?
Well, I think they should repeal Obamacare, which is impossible to make work. At the Center for Health Transformation, we've developed 3 large charts that show you just how bad Obamacare is. One of them shows 1,968 grants of power to the bureaucracy in Washington inside this one bill. But I think we have to have, and this is why I helped found the Center for Health Transformation, I think we have to have a program for modernizing the health system, and we have to have a program which enables us to move forward in a very effective way. And I think that there's a lot to be gained from that kind of approach.
We live in a beautiful world, but so many people just don't seem to get it. What can be done to better educate people to be more aware of the real priorities and issues that we should all be concerned with? I understand you've been involved with an initiative with Sharpton with regards to education, and in this beautiful world so many people seem to be ignorant and not informed, and so the more we can do to educate, the better. I like saying sometimes so many people are mercifully free of the ravages of intelligence. What more can we do to promote education in this world? Well,
I think people are relatively intelligent, but they sometimes don't have very much knowledge, and I think that's the failure of the education system. I did work with Reverend Al Sharpton because we felt that having a black liberal Democrat and a white conservative Republican go together to say we need education reform would attract a kind of attention and a kind of interest, and it turned out to work pretty well. And we went, frankly, with Secretary Arne Duncan of the Obama administration. Parents have every right to know the quality of education their child's getting. They have every right to know if the teacher is competent or not competent. They have every right to know if the school is competent or not competent. If the school is failing their child, they should have every right to take the child out and go to a charter school. In my judgment, we ought to actually have Pell Grants for K through 12, and parents should be able to send their child to the school they want to go to. There should certainly be merit pay. Teachers who are better should get more money. There should also be an ability, if a person's not a competent teacher, they need to either be retrained or they need to find a new profession, but you don't want to keep them in a classroom where they're failing. So I think there has to be very, very substantial reform in education.
So I'd like to change topics and go to the Middle East, to Israel, a tiny country that you visited so many times. You're a friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister. How do you see the current challenges facing the state of Israel at this time?
Well, I think Israel is in this extraordinary paradox where on the one hand it is economically stronger than it's ever been. It has a remarkable growth of high-tech industry. It has now found huge natural gas reserves. And so in some ways the future for Israel looks better. On the other hand, the international situation has become dramatically more hostile to Israel. The threat of radical Islamists, whether they are in Lebanon, Gaza, Syria, Iran, is worse. The fact that the Iranian Navy has now gone through the Suez Canal for the first time, I think, in 30 years, and is now practicing in the Mediterranean has to be of great concern to the Israelis. The fact that the Iranians are trying to build nuclear weapons and openly say, Ahmadinejad, their leader, openly says he would like to eliminate Israel. The fact that Hamas's leadership has a clear goal of eliminating Israel. All these things are problems we haven't solved. And I think all of the shallow diplomatic talk about finding a peace solution, until people understand that it is ultimately going to be necessary to defeat those who hate and to defeat those who want to destroy. And until you defeat them, you're not going to get to peace. I mean, you can get to temporary truces, but the number of schools in the Middle East who are teaching children hatred should sober and frighten every American. And we do not have today an effective strategy against that kind of propaganda war.
Terrible situation, child abuse, I would say. Speaking of the administration, many Democrats, even liberal Jewish Democrats, voters, are somewhat disappointed. Reluctantly, they must admit they are concerned with how the present administration seems to have turned its back largely on Israel, more so than any other administration. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the Obama administration has a lot of very left-wing appointees in national security, at the State Department, at the Defense Department, in the National Security Council. And their worldview is largely a blame Israel first. They think there's somehow a magic solution that, as the president's senior advisor on terrorism said, that he's seeking moderates in Hezbollah. Seeking moderates in Hezbollah is like seeking Rotarians in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. There are no moderates in Hezbollah. It's dedicated to the destruction of Israel. There are no moderates in Hamas. It's dedicated to the destruction of Israel. But facing the reality of how deeply these institutions hate and want to destroy Israel would lead you to policy consequences that American liberals can't deal with. And so in order to not have to face the consequence of that reality, they simply deny the reality. I think it's very, very dangerous.
The United Nations represented such a hope for mankind after World War II, and now it seems to have been converted into a chamber of double standards where Israel is maligned and basically unfairly singled out for prosecution in a sense. What are your thoughts on the United Nations?
Well, I think that when you have blocks of nations which are dictatorships and blocks of nations which are committed to dishonesty and to fundamental rewriting of reality, you shouldn't be surprised. Libya, remember, a country where Gaddafi is now killing people, was elected chair of the Human Rights Commission. Now, I mean, how can you take seriously an organization that would do that? The fact is that the original idealistic design of the United Nations was flawed by the way it was structured. Had they adopted a provision that democracies that have the rule of law, that have independent judiciaries, could belong to the United Nations. In retrospect, in 1945, because we were trying to accommodate the Soviet Union, we designed a United Nations with the wrong core set of rules. The United Nations should have been restricted to democratic governments that had the rule of law, that had independent judges and private property rights. Had we done that, you would have had today, from Taiwan to South Korea to Japan, across the world, a set of members who had a common set of values and a common set of beliefs. Instead, by saying any sovereign nation can belong no matter how anti-civilization they are, no matter what kind of dictatorship they are, no matter how bad their government, you allowed a collection of small countries who collectively don't pay very much of the UN dues and who don't have very many people, to consistently outvote the democracies in a way which is turning the United Nations, I think, into a mockery of its core values.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask you about Jerusalem, a city built by King David and Solomon in the year 1330 BC, 2,000 years before Islam, and divided only once for 19 years until 1967. Jerusalem is not mentioned once in the Quran, but over 700 times in our Bible, the Old and New Testaments. The Muslims want Jerusalem and a lot more. What solutions would you suggest?
Well, the city of Jerusalem is a city of three religions. And I think you have to recognize that. It is the original core of Judaism and is still today the central point of Judaism. It is the founding place of Christianity and in many ways the holiest and most important place for Christianity. And it is a place of extraordinary importance for Islam, which after all grew up looking towards Israel and looking towards Jerusalem as a central city in the time of Muhammad. Having said that, I think one of the first things the next president should do on the very first day that they're in office is issue an executive order that says the United States will respect the right of countries to define their own capitals, and we will establish our embassy in the place designated by that country. The only country in the world in which the United States does not put its embassy in the capital is Israel. And that is fundamentally wrong. There is zero reason to not have the American embassy in Jerusalem, and there is zero reason not to say to the Arab world that it is a fact that Jerusalem has been unified, and it's a fact that Jerusalem will remain unified, and that it is inconceivable that any Israeli government would ever accept the partitioning of Jerusalem again.
How do you see the future in the Middle East?
I think it's a question of whether or not the forces of hatred are defeated. If the forces of hatred are allowed to continue to grow, as they have for the last 10 years, we are in a weaker position today in terms of stopping hatred than we were 10 years ago. Despite Iraq, despite Afghanistan, despite all the things we've done in the global war on terror, or nowadays the overseas contingency operation, whatever you want to call it, we have greatly underestimated how hard this problem is. Saudi money finances 80% of the madrasas, the religious schools in the world that teach hatred. The Hamas is now trying to recruit children to be bombers, using children's television to recruit people to be suicide bombers. And I agree with you. We should describe that as child abuse, and the world should be outraged. The Iranians continue to work to develop nuclear weapons. And I think people should recognize this is a time of enormous precariousness. If we find our way to a strategy of defeating radical Islam and strengthening and supporting moderate modern Islam, which is in effect splitting the Muslim world between its radicals and the people willing to live in modernity. If we find and we execute that strategy effectively, I think you could have a wonderful future in the region. If we fail to do that, I think you could have a very, very dangerous and potentially very violent future in the region.
Sir, many people would like to see you be the next president of the United States, and whether you decide to run or not, America needs all the help it can get. I want to thank you so very, very much for being with us today.